So, Over the Garden Wall is one of my favorite shows of all time, and now that it's fall again, it's of course time for a rewatch. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend watching it before this video. I'm going to spoil a lot, and I'm going to be operating under the assumption you've seen the show before, so sorry if you haven't. But for as much as I love the show, and for as many discussions as I've seen about it, there's one bit that I'm surprised doesn't receive more coverage and discussion.
We're related cause my mom remarried and then gave birth to him with my stepdad.
There is so much to say about this show. Some of my favorite video essays on the internet revolve around even the most minor details, and yet the family dynamics at play are something I don't see a lot of people touch on. Now, like a lot of important information and excellent foreshadowing in this show, this tidbit comes to us with such finesse, and it feels like more of a humorous moment than anything, so maybe that's why it doesn't get much discussion online. While Over the Garden Wall is a masterclass in foreshadowing, tactful info dumping, and storytelling in general, it's also a masterclass in characterization, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. I want to analyze the character of Greg, and more so Wirt, understand the dynamics between them, investigate what draws them to us, and track their character arcs. So, let's get into it. We'll take everything episode by episode. Episode 1, The Old Grist Mill, opens with some of that excellent foreshadowing that I mentioned earlier, giving us music, visuals, and narration to establish mood. But the introduction to our main characters opens with this.
Giggly, Jumpy, Tom, Thomas, Tambourine, Legface, McCullen, Artichoke, Penguin, Pete, Steve.
I've often said that dialogue is an easy way to start your story. It's in media res, signaling to your audience that you're already starting in the middle of something. You might find that a little cheap, but I think it's effective, and that's what we see here. Our introduction to Greg is him verbally listing things. The list makes us immediately curious, and once the explanation is revealed,
But I think the very worst name for this frog is...
we get an immediate sense of Greg's character. He's a goofball. Also, on the subject of the frog, I'll be calling him by multiple names in this video, but if you've seen the show, you'll be able to keep up. But it's in Greg and Wirt's first real exchange that we really get a sense of how things are and will be.
Wait a second. Greg? Where are we?
In the woods?
Like I said, a masterclass in characterization. In just 2 lines, we immediately get the gist. Wirt is anxious and Greg is unbothered. The reason we're so interested in following these characters is because Greg is so lovable while Wirt is so relatable. Wirt is a chronic overthinker, which I imagine is a trait a lot of viewers share. Meanwhile, Greg is too headstrong, rushing into things without thinking at all. We'll see that these attributes are both strengths and weaknesses. What excellent foils these characters are to one another. Later, once Greg and Wirt are at the mill with the woodsman, we get a brief monologue from the older sibling.
Further and further, drifting away from where I want to be, who I want to be.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Normally, soliloquies like this would be frowned upon. People in real life don't often just announce how they're feeling out loud, and characters in fiction shouldn't really do it either. But it works here for a few reasons. For one thing, through this monologue, we understand that Wirt is just melodramatic. He's a teenager, and I'm sure we all remember what that's like. Greg doesn't take Wirt too seriously here, and neither does the narrative, so we know we're meant to understand that we're not supposed to take him too seriously either. We'll see more on this as we go forward. Wirt's identity as an insecure teenager is extremely important to the show as a whole. See, Wirt is a selfish character, and I don't mean selfish in the typical or obvious sense of the word. I mean the kind of selfishness we often see in young people. Wirt seems to be under the impression that the whole world is constantly looking his way. He has a hard time looking outside himself and turning outward. That social anxiety is, again, part of what endears us to him. This little exchange shows that at the start of our story here, Greg and Wirt don't really see each other. They don't really listen to each other. If Greg had been paying attention, he would have heard Wirt say that they shouldn't hurt the woodsman. If Wirt had been paying attention, he might have asked Greg why he was swinging objects around. Thankfully, things work out for our heroes, but both of the boys were at least partially responsible for the jeopardy they found themselves in. Of course, Wirt can't see his own responsibility because of that selfishness I mentioned earlier.
You're always messing up, Greg.
This causes the woodsman to say,
Boy, you have it backwards. You are the elder child. You are responsible for you and your brother's actions.
Personally, I don't agree with that entirely. I do think Greg has some responsibility here. Even so, we understand, no matter how consciously, that Over the Garden Wall is a story about Wirt learning to get out of his own head and show concern for someone else. And speaking of Wirt's lack of concern for others, episode 2, Hard Times at the Huskin Bee, opens with this exchange.
I'm stuck. I hear something.
It's probably nothing.
Again, we see Wirt only worried about himself, not listening to Greg or what turns out to be the voice of Beatrice. Remember how I said earlier that Wirt's overthinking could be a strength and a weakness? Well, when it comes to Beatrice, Greg's skepticism comes in handy. If they'd gone straight to Adelaide, things would have ended very poorly for our heroes. Like all of my favorite pieces of media, Over the Garden Wall has some nuance. Caution is a good thing, but too much caution isn't. Being carefree is a good thing, but being too carefree isn't. Wirt is not the ideal, but neither is Greg. One is too trusting, the other is too skeptical. And what the show ultimately teaches us is that there's a healthy balance between these two types of characters. Unfortunately for Wirt, a microcosm of his selfishness interferes with his sense of caution in this episode. Episode 2 introduces us to Wirt's stubbornness, which we'll see again and again throughout the series. He wants to be so correct in his choice to go to Pottsfield that he ignores all signs of danger. Wirt's selfishness soon faces challenge as Enoch points out that Wirt and the gang have actually been a little rude.
Now let me get this straight. You come to our town, you trample our crops, you interrupt our private engagement. Now you want to leave.
It's so fitting that the punishment here is just a few hours of manual labor. It's an important lesson for Wirt. How does he pay back selfishness? Through service to the community. Outward gestures for others. Work that doesn't benefit him directly. He's not even allowed to take a bite of the corn he husks because the manual labor isn't for him, it's for the people of Pottsfield. Wirt's selfishness and stubbornness come to a head at the episode's climax, where it seems that Wirt and Greg have dug their own graves. Wirt finally admits,
I was wrong all along.
but even then, he has a hard time asking Beatrice for help. Wirt, like all of us, needs other people, but he can't yet admit that. I have to wonder if Wirt is projecting when he sees Greg and Beatrice leaving without him. He thinks they abandoned him when, in reality, Beatrice had broken him out too. He was free to go. Beatrice even goes back for him, even though she wanted to ditch him towards the episode's opening. Is there a part of Wirt who thinks he would perhaps leave his brother if the shoe was on the other foot? And, despite all the growth in this episode, it ends with Wirt criticizing the woodsman's directions. He doesn't wonder if perhaps he didn't follow those directions as well as he could have. So there's still work to do. Episode 3, Schooltown Follies, sort of smacks you over the head with what it's doing, but that's not a bad thing. Beatrice even calls Wirt a stubborn jerk after he plays into being a pushover.
When are you gonna give this up?
Maybe never.
What's funny though is how Greg sees Wirt's stubbornness in this moment as aspirational. He takes it as a lesson in never giving up. That, to me, again illustrates the balance. Some stubbornness is good when it comes to persistence and perseverance. Greg's plan here in this episode again highlights the need for generosity. The solution to the school's problems is a charity concert where people give out of the goodness of their hearts, as Miss Langtree puts it. But the ending initially had me a little confused, admittedly. Wirt stops the gorilla by tripping over his shoelaces. I wasn't sure what to make of this. What's the lesson? That it was good for Wirt to not tie his shoes? In thinking about it a little longer, I think there are two things for us to take away. First, while it's bad to be a pushover, it's not so bad to listen to other people when it's warranted. Beatrice tells Wirt to do something, and he does. And that carries us into our second lesson here in this episode. Sometimes, instead of thinking, it's just better to act. Compulsion isn't always a bad thing when chronic overthinking might be the alternative. Again, it's nuanced and balanced. Wirt and Beatrice both shed some selfishness in this episode, especially as they let Greg have some fun with the animals. What's more, while we shouldn't be pushovers, it's not being a pushover to simply rely on other people. Beatrice ends up helping Wirt, and once again, that's something we'll see more of as we continue. Episode 4, Songs of the Dark Lantern, is the one I pulled from at the top of the video. This is where we learn that Greg and Wirt are stepbrothers. Again, this moment is kind of glossed over and sort of played for comedy, but as a viewer, I wonder if Wirt's familial circumstances play into his insecurities, along with the seeming resentment he shows toward Greg sometimes. I'm probably extrapolating a little too much here, but I sort of feel like Wirt remembers his life as a child with his birth parents. Then, as he came into his own as an older child, his life was sort of turned upside down with a new dad and baby brother. All that change must have affected him, and might have compounded on the difficulties that come with puberty. But again, I might be going beyond what the text is really providing. This episode is also worth considering for how much it discusses identity. The folks at the tavern are very concerned with labels and are so eager to pin Wirt down with a title of his own, as if he didn't already have an identity crisis to deal with. Wirt seems to really love the idea of being the pilgrim, a traveler on a sacred journey, master of his own fate, trailblazer toward his destiny. And he really takes up that mantle. He shows real bravery when he goes to save Beatrice. At first, he's sort of doing it out of peer pressure, but then he just does it. Fake it till you make it? Or maybe more of that idea of less thinking and more acting? Either way, we see Wirt coming into his own, especially as he sacrifices for others. And speaking of Wirt coming into his own, that's a perfect segue to episode 5, Mad Love. Wirt lays his insecurities out in plain English here.
I have this crush on this girl, and I think about her a lot, and I play clarinet, and I secretly whisper poetry to myself in my room at night.
As Beatrice tells Wirt, none of these are a big deal at all, and it's kind of silly for Wirt to think they are a big deal. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Wirt's feelings aren't valid. He's entitled to feel however he wants. But if he were to just take a step back and get some perspective, he'd probably realize that everyone has stuff like that going on. As Beatrice puts it,
Wirt, that stuff's not weird. Those are just character traits.
it's just part of being a human being. But like many of us, especially when we were teenagers, Wirt is afraid to be who he truly is. But it's with Beatrice's help and listening ear that he learns to get outside of himself a little bit. And we see that in episode 6, Lullaby in Frogland, where Wirt sings, dances, and laughs with Greg. All it took was a little friendship. Look at how positive relationships can affect our self-esteem. The American Psychology Association proved just as much in a meta-analysis of more than 20 years worth of research. To quote the APA article, the authors found that positive social relationships, social support, and social acceptance help shape the development of self-esteem in people over time across ages 4 to 76. The authors also found a significant effect in the reverse direction. While earlier research had yielded inconsistent findings, the meta-analysis supports the classic and contemporary theories of the influence of self-esteem on social connections and the influence of social connections on self-esteem, according to Harris. The findings were the same after accounting for gender and ethnicity. The reciprocal link between self-esteem and social relationships implies that the effects of a positive feedback loop accumulate over time and could be substantial as people go through life. That sounds kind of obvious on paper, and yet it's easy to forget. And it's not just the beginning of the episode that shows how a little positive reinforcement and relationships can affect us. When the gang gets into a jam and Wirt has to play the bassoon, he says,
Nobody wants to hear me play.
Beatrice says,
I do.
and while she does have ulterior motives here, Wirt doesn't know that. From his point of view, a friend is supporting him, and look how far that takes him. Greg and George Washington also give him their support in this moment. Similarly, George Washington sings for the boatgoers, to which Greg says,
I knew you were special.
and I kind of wonder if it's his confidence in the frog that prompted the singing. But when the friendship with Beatrice starts to crumble, Wirt starts to revert to his old self. Beatrice flies away and Wirt shouts,
Come on, Greg!
without noticing what, or who, Greg is leaving behind. And just as Beatrice's confidence inspires Wirt, her betrayal cuts him deeply. He turns inward again.
I shouldn't have trusted anyone.
This reminds me of a quote from Claudia Rankine's Don't Let Me Be Lonely, but I'm going to save it for later as it's just too good to not save till the end. Despite the betrayal, there is still hope in the darkness. Benjamin Franklin returns to Greg and Wirt. But even then, Wirt just says,
Hurry it up, Greg.
and episode 7, The Ringing of the Bell, picks up on that same note. Wirt says,
I don't need Beatrice. I'll figure this out on my own.
and for a moment it seems Wirt thinks he can perhaps replace the hole that Beatrice left with Lorna. But even if Lorna had gone with the boys, Wirt likely knew it wouldn't have been the same. So even though the adventure with Lorna was ultimately uplifting, Wirt still ends up with less and less hope. It doesn't help that Auntie Whispers mentions Adelaide before the protagonists head off. Greg tells Wirt he saved the day twice, but all Wirt can say is,
Yeah, I guess. But so what? We're still not any closer to getting home. I just don't know what I'm doing out here anymore. I don't know if we'll ever get back home.
So once we enter episode 8, Babes in the Wood, it's no wonder Wirt says,
I don't know much of anything anymore.
it's here where the story really starts to seem like an allegory for depression in youth. I know a lot of people read the story as one about the afterlife or purgatory, and that's pretty clear within the text. But on the subtextual level, I absolutely think this show has something to say about mental health. Wirt even says, can we please stop pretending we're ever gonna get home? Which, to me, reads like a metaphorical way of saying, can we please stop pretending we're ever gonna be happy again? Because that's often what depression can feel like. Utter hopelessness, the feeling that life will never be as good as it once was. And compounding on Wirt's depression and hopelessness is his selfishness and sense of blamelessness. He says it's Greg's fault that they're lost in the first place. Greg was allegedly goofing around and getting into trouble like always. As such, Wirt reasons,
It's not my job to get us home, okay? I'm done.
he won't take on any responsibility for himself or Greg. When the boys lie down and sleep, Greg has his dream wherein he fights the Old North Wind. The idea of a north wind is one that's had cultural and literary significance for a very long time. If you've ever read pretty much anything, you'll know how symbolic the seasons can be. And of course, a season's true meaning is never fixed in literature, it's always open for interpretation. But oftentimes, summer and fall are representative of life, what with the harvest, while winter is representative of death, given the harvest's end and the arrival of conditions that won't sustain life. Spring then represents a rebirth. But like I said, these symbols are fluid, they don't always stand for just one thing. Case in point, a fresh blanket of snow can symbolize opportunity. But in the case of the Old North Wind, I do think it has something to do with Wirt's descent. As the song says, the north wind blows and blows until you can't feel no more. Again, sounds a lot like depression, the pure absence of feeling. And I should make it clear, I'm not trying to conflate depression and selfishness, those are two different traits that Wirt has. But you could argue that his selfishness is one of the root causes of his depression. While Wirt retreats into his negative feelings, Greg's selflessness is on display. When the Queen of the Clouds offers Greg a way home, he doesn't take it, not without Wirt. And ultimately, Greg goes with the beast, all in the hopes that it will provide a path home for both himself and Wirt. That takes us into episode 9, Into the Unknown, where everything is revealed. We learn that Wirt's not just any teenager, but a teenager in modern-day America, or maybe the 1980s at the earliest. We discover that Wirt was even more relatable than we could have realized. From the episode's very beginning, we see that feeling of being hopelessly in love as a teenager, thinking of your life as a movie. It's good stuff, man. Just adding to the classic teenager stuff is the little brother who embarrasses Wirt. It's interesting how the girls in this scene, Wirt's classmates, tease him, but don't seem to actually bully him. They even do him a solid by saying Jason Funderburker, the human, is going to ask Sarah out. It again makes me think that Wirt is just too deep inside his own head. He has no reason to be so embarrassed around his peers. Well, okay, admittedly the blonde girl does seem kind of mean. Still, this conclusion on my part only feels further evidenced by the party. Wirt says he wasn't invited to the party, but everyone is seemingly glad to see him there. Like, even if he wasn't invited, nobody has a problem with him being there. It kind of reminds me of that scene from Meet the Robinsons.
What's up? Cool binder. Hey, Goop, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
Just listen to how Wirt catastrophizes.
My life is crumbling all around me.
Tell me you never had that thought as a teenager. Or hell, tell me you never had that thought this year. And as Wirt feels his life is crumbling around him, he finds sufficient scapegoat in Greg. When the two get cornered in the graveyard, Wirt says,
Greg, why did you say this way?
Demonstrating the language of blame yet again. Wirt then says,
Once again, you ruined my life.
Who, me?
but what does Wirt mean? How did Greg ruin his life before this night?
You and your stupid dad. You're always prodding me, trying to get me to join marching band.
Oh, yeah.
This is a funny subversion because it actually sounds like Wirt's stepdad is just as supportive as Greg. Based on how much Wirt seems to resent Greg, you would think the stepdad might be a crappy guy. But no, Wirt's just so insecure he resents the kind of support his stepdad gives him. It's through this flashback where Wirt has his moment of realization, the epiphany. He essentially sees things from our perspective. He realizes how unfair he was towards Greg, not just through the unknown, but throughout their entire time together. Beatrice's mom says,
You'll be no good to your brother dead.
and Wirt voices his epiphany in response.
I was never any good to him alive, either.
Now, Wirt is driven by something more than himself, something greater than himself, and he can finally take action. He's done thinking, he's done being depressed, he is ready to act, and it was love that drove him to this point. The true, binding love he has for his brother, a love that was hidden deep down behind Wirt's own self. And given his new perspective, he finally takes full accountability once they're reunited.
No, Greg. It's my fault we ended up here. Everything's been my fault.
And most significant of all is this moment right here. Just before Wirt realizes the beast's deal is a trick, he is fully prepared to take on the role of lantern bearer, all to keep Greg alive. This is the apex of his character arc. He has truly shed himself of all his selfishness and embraced love. He found a love for his brother that his brother had for him all along, and all it took really was a bit of self-reflection and a lot of empathy. And so, once Wirt wakes up, he makes sure to carry both Greg and Jason Funderburker to shore. Where the old Wirt might have been more concerned with himself, this Wirt really goes out of his way to help his kin. And what really gets me is how, despite this epic character arc, Wirt still retains a bit of his awkward energy.
Maybe we should listen to some other tapes first, though, and sort of work our way to this one. This one's a little bit,
As Beatrice said, it's just a character trait. It's not a weakness, it's who he is. And with that, we're going to circle back to that Claudia Rankine book I mentioned earlier, Don't Let Me Be Lonely. As I said, Over the Garden Wall is surprisingly balanced and nuanced. There's give and take. Greg is not a perfect character, and Wirt is not a perfect character either. They're two ends of a spectrum, two sides to the same coin. But do you know what is perfect? The thing that binds them, their mutual love for each other. But I'll let Claudia Rankine tell it. Paul Celan said that the poem was no different from a handshake. I cannot see any basic difference between a handshake and a poem, is how Rosemary Waldrop translated his German. The handshake is our decided ritual of both asserting, I am here, and handing over, here, a self to another. Hence, the poem is that, here, I am here. This conflation of the solidity of presence with the offering of the same presence perhaps has everything to do with being alive. Or, one meaning of here is, in this world, in this life, on earth, in this place or position, indicating the presence of, or in other words, I am here. It also means to hand something to somebody. Here you are. Here, he said to her. Here both recognizes and demands recognition. I see you, or here, he said to her. In order for something to be handed over, a hand must extend and a hand must receive. We must both be here in this world, in this life, in this place, indicating the presence of, end quote. To extend and to receive, or in other words, to give and to take. It's not wrong for Wirt to want recognition, but at the same time, he must recognize. So, there we have it. Over the Garden Wall is a story about overcoming our selfishness. It's a story about a young man who learns to look outside of himself and how that generous, loving perspective drives him to action. And that's just one of the many reasons it's an aspirational story, one we still hang on to all these years later. And hey, if you've stuck around this long, you're probably an Over the Garden Wall fan, so I want to pose some questions to you. What's the deal with the turtles? And what about Pottsfield? If the unknown is purgatory, why is Pottsfield seemingly the only place with skeletons? And why are they alive? Why do they dress up in pumpkin and vegetable garb? What's up with Enoch being a cat? How is he puppeteering that thing? Why does Jason Funderburker sing but never say another word? Is Greg's dream just an illusion from the beast? I love that there are still so many mysteries in this show, so many areas on which we can speculate. It's delightful. Please tell me your thoughts as well as any thoughts you had on this video. And hey, before you go, take a look at this poem from one of my patrons. This is Stars by Wyatt A. Cummings. Where will the souls of stars go when the world ends? Where will my soul go when I die? The same place, I hope. For the chance to feature your work at the end of a video, or if you just like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like early access to videos, access to the community Discord, and priority review for your work over on the second channel. You're seeing the names of my patrons on screen right now, and as always, I genuinely can't thank them enough. If you want to support me in other ways, doing all the things the algorithm likes really helps a lot, especially hyping this video. At least, I think. You can also follow me on my socials, but no matter what, keep reading, keep writing, and ultimately, keep in mind, this is a rough draft. And so the story is complete, and everyone is satisfied with the ending, and so on and so forth, and yet, over the garden wall. How the gentle wind beckons through the leaves as autumn colors fall.